Hello, algebra classes. We're going to now start working on figuring out, once we have a data set, we have information, what do we do with it in order to make sense of it? So we've already gathered some data about how many hours students study at Pomona Catholic, and so we're going to take a look at one way we could actually make sense of all that data that we collected. So today we're going to take a look at what are called finding measures of central tendency. That is, what number would represent the middle of all the data if that's what we were interested in finding out. Well, there are going to be three ways that we're going to crunch our numbers so that we can find out what number best represents the middle of all of our data. So we're going to take a look first at our key concepts. Make sure this is in your paperwork. It will be what you're going to refer to when you're wanting to remember what do we do to find either the mean, which is also called the average, the median, or the mode. Those are all central tendency measures. That is, they all are ways that we can describe the number that best represents the middle of all of the data. So the mean or average, which is denoted by x bar, so that's actually how we read it. There's a bar over the x bar. How do we find that average? You've probably done this before. So here is our notation for what you have probably done to find the average of numbers. We add up all the numbers in the data set. And then once we have summed up all of those data values, we divide by the total number of data that is in the set. So if there's 12 numbers that you were trying to find the average for, you would be dividing by 12. If there were 5,286 values that you were trying to average, you would be summing up all those data values and then dividing by 5,286. So your grades are actually figured out with a mean or an average. Historically, that's the way that schools typically decide what that middle number is that represents your progress that you've made. We take all of your scores, we add them up, divide by the number of scores there are, and that determines your average, which then determines your grade. It's kind of as simple as that. So what that means is that when you're finding the average, if you have some high numbers that are way above all the other numbers in your value set, it will pull your average up. And if you have some low numbers, well below all the rest of the data in your set, it will tend to pull that average way down. And that is one of the reasons why at our school 50% is the lowest value that we put in our grade books, so that those zero scores, if you haven't done anything, doesn't pull your average down so far, because one or two zeros in the grade book with all your other scores being, say, 80 or higher, can actually make your grade fall to something like a D, which we don't feel best represents your work. All right, so mean or average, add up all the data values, divide by the total number of data values in the set. Median. Median is the middle value of a data set ordered smallest to largest, least to greatest. If there are two middle values, the median is the average or mean of these two values. Oftentimes, housing prices are reported using median as what would be that typical house value. And that way, if you have, a several $1 million house that's up on the hill, that if you were to average all of the house values would pull the average way up. The median might get a better picture of what's the typical price of a house in a particular area. Mode. Mode is the most often occurring value in a data set. There can be 0, 1, 2, or more values in the data set that are the mode. If every number in the data set occurs only once, there is no mode. So just kind of get the mindset on this. Let's say you are a researcher and you're trying to figure out what is the typical number of eggs that a particular species of birds lays. And so you go around to all the nests and you count how many eggs are in each nest. So one way to look at that data might be to say, okay, what is the most often occurring number of eggs that are in the nest? And let's say that most of the nests have 3 eggs. You have some nests that have 0 eggs, some that have 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but most of the nests have 3. So a mode would be a good way to describe the typical number of eggs that those birds lay in those particular nests. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at example 1. Example 1 asks which central tendency best represents the data. And so we're being asked to figure out what is the mean, which is also called the average, the median, and the mode of the data we're given. And then we're to write which one actually best represents the middle of all of that data. So we're given some heights and waterfalls in feet, and they happen to be already organized from least to greatest. So the lowest waterfall, 1,000, the highest waterfall, 2,584. And first of all, I want you to just kind of notice what's happening here. We have a lot of data here that is in the 1,000, 1,200, 1,300 range, from 1,000 to 1,300, and then all of a sudden we have this really tall waterfall. So when we go to average these numbers, this 2,584 is really going to pull the average up a lot. And so that average might not best represent all of this data. We'll look at the numbers and see if that happens here. And then we also might notice that the only number that occurs more than once in this data is 1,000. And so if we were to use the mode to best represent this data, we might say, well, 1,000 is below all the other data values, so it might not be the best central tendency measure. They're all valid measures, mean, median, and mode, but which one best represents the middle is what we're looking at here. So that leaves the median, and so the median might be the best representation here because that number that's in the middle of all of these might be the best choice because there will be at least as many numbers below as above what the median is. So let's go ahead and calculate all of them and take a look at the specifics to see how this works. So we're going to find the mean, which we can denote as x bar. We add up all of the values, and because there's 8 values in this data set, we divide by 8. And yes, you may use a calculator to add all these up to get 10,752 and divide that by 8 in your calculator. And you find out that the average waterfall height is 1,344. And that's above all of these data values. There's only one data value that's above that 1,344 average. All the rest of them, all 7 of them, are below that. So that might not best represent the middle of all this data, just because there's so many values that fall below the average. All right, median. Well, we're already organized smallest to biggest, least to greatest. So we have 2 numbers in the middle. There's 3 values below, 3 values above. And when you have 2 numbers in the middle, when you're trying to find the median, you actually have to average these 2. You have to find the number that is smack dab in the middle of these 2. That's what I'm doing here, adding them up, dividing them by 2, since there's 2 values I'm averaging. And that gives me 1,195.5. So that would be the median. And 1,195.5, that would fall right here, and there's just as many values above as below, so that might be the best central tendency measure here to establish the middle of all of this data. All right, so if there's only one middle value, like if there were 7 data items here, then we would only have one number in the middle, and that number would actually be the median. And we'll see that in an example a little bit lower. A little bit later on in this guided practice. All right, mode. The mode is the most often occurring number in a data set. And if you only have the numbers in your data set appearing once, there's never any repeats, and there would be no mode. Well, in this case, we only have one number that occurs more than once, and that's 1,000. It occurs twice. No other numbers occur twice, so therefore 1,000 is the mode. All right, here's my summary of what I found out. Mean is 1,344. Median is 1,195.5, and the mode is 1,000. So we've already kind of talked about the answer to the question, which one of these central tendency measures, mean, median, or mode, best represents the middle of this data. Well, the median, in this case, best represents the data. The mode is significantly less than most of the data, 1,000. It's less than all of the other data values. And the mean is significantly greater than most of the data. We saw that 7 data values fell below the mean and only 1 data value fell above it. So that probably isn't the best way to represent the middle of all this data, even though we got actual and good numbers. These are all valid numbers, mean, median, and mode. But in this case, because of the data we're presented with, probably the best way to understand what is the best middle value would be the median for this particular data set. All right, board problems A through D. On here, we're just going to take a look at mode and median and some of the special cases that can come up. So board problem A, find the mode. The mode is the most often occurring number, and in this data set, no value occurs more than once, so there's no mode. And remember, if I have written something in a thinking bubble, you don't have to write that on your paper. You can if you want, but it's not required. Part B, find the mode. For this data set, well, let's see the mode. I have my numbers organized least to greatest. That helps me identify which numbers occur more than once. If your data set isn't already organized in that way, oftentimes it will be best if you do organize your numbers least to greatest to find the mode, and you have to for the median. All right, so I have 3 numbers that occur more than once. 8, 15, and 21 occur 3 times, and then I actually have 16 occurring twice. So what's the mode? The mode is 8, 15, and 21. There can be more than one value that is the mode. So the reason that there are 3 values in this case is there's a 3-way tie for first place. So all 3 numbers are the mode. Notice that 16, which also occurs more than once, is not a mode because it only happens twice. Second place runner-ups are not listed for the mode. So the mode only is the number or numbers that occur the most often. All right, board problem C, find the median. Well, in our example, our median value came from averaging two middle numbers because there was an even number of numbers that were in our data set. There were 8 numbers in that waterfall example. So we did have to average the two middle numbers. But in this case, I have 7 data values, and 33 is smack dab in the middle. There's 3 values above, 3 values below. So this is the median with no further work, the number in the middle when the data is listed least to greatest. So if there's an odd number of values in your data set, your median will be the number in the middle, no further work. But if you have an even number of values in your data set, you will have 2 numbers in the middle. So for board problem D, find the median, we'll have 4 data values below these middle numbers and 4 data values above. We do have to average these. We have to find out what number is smack dab in the middle of 62 and 68, and we can find that by averaging those 2 numbers. So you can add them up and divide by 2, and that'll give you 65. You also could do what I call the scooching in method. 62 and 68 scooch into 67 and 63. That scooches to 66 and 64. What's exactly halfway in between 66 and 64? Well, it would be 65. So that's kind of an informal way of averaging these 2 numbers, and sometimes it's obvious, that number exactly in the middle of your 2 middle values in your data set, because 62 plus 3 is 65, 65 plus 3 is 68, 65 is 3 spaces away from both 62 and 68, so we can see either with that scooching in method or the logic that I just went through that your median would have to be 65. So if you have 2 values in the middle of your data set, to find the median you average them, add them up, divide by 2. If there's only 1 value in the middle of your data set because you have an odd number of values, then there is no calculation that needs to be done. That middle number would be your median. Okay, so now it's time for you to move on to the homework portion of this lesson, and we'll see you next time.